All right, it's 6 p.m. on January 3rd, 2024. This is a Finance Committee meeting in conjunction with a Select Board meeting and members of the school committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Brewer, do you need to call your meeting to order also?
Yes, we should. So I don't think we need to do the pledge of allegiance again, but I'm calling the meeting to order. Concluded later.
Thank you. So we have a big group of people here. I'd love to just go around the room and everyone can introduce themselves and who's here tonight. I'm Karen Rouse, Chair of the Finance Committee.
I'm Christopher Thrasher, at-large representative for the Finance Committee.
Evan Gendro, School Committee.
Nancy Stanton-Cross, Chair of the School Committee.
Shauna Shefelt, Select Board.
Jim Harden, our Administrator.
Michelle Orlando, Finance Committee.
Zach LaBrue, Finance Committee.
Cindy Brown, Vice Chair, Finance Committee.
Mandy Source, Select Board.
Hugh Morton, Finance Committee.
Great. And we have some of our members remote, so if you could, we can introduce, I can help introduce you. Al Lees, Finance Committee.
Finance Committee.
Thank you. Dick Brewer, Chair of the Select Board. And Gary Carrero, Finance Committee.
Yes.
Hi, Gary. Thank you. I think that's everyone.
We also have Tom Albin in the audience for Superintendent. Tom, you might want to come sit up in front if you don't mind. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming again. We had met back in October, and we started the early process of our budget season kicking off for fiscal 25. And we're a couple of months further into it, and Mr. Hartnett has a first draft of a town administrator budget that he presented to the Select Board a couple of weeks ago. That's been distributed to everyone with a wonderful PowerPoint presentation that was done that really explained a lot of things that are going on. Jim, I don't know if you want to talk any highlights about that or where we're at.
I think I'm good right now, but I'll
Okay.
jump in once we get started.
Yeah, sure. So just to give everyone a summary, hopefully everybody's seen that budget. So Jim put together, there's a lot of unknowns at this point still in the budget process in terms of revenue from the state aid in particular. There's still some expenses that are still unknown in terms of insurance and pension, and so there's some big unknowns that are still working on. But Jim put together the presentation, and there's a holding place for all the departments. There are no cuts in the town departments. Is that correct, Jim? You've held departments
No
constant?
position cuts at
No
this
position cuts. The lack of positions is still the same as we've experienced in previous years. So there's no add to staffs, but the positions have not been further cut. At the present time, the 54% split with the school is posted in that budget, and it's barely balanced at this point, right? So it's a break-even budget at this point. So which is beyond expectations, I think, from where we at least started in October. So I think some revenues came in excess of where we were initially thinking. So we're in a decent place to start. So does anyone have any questions or comments on where we stand with the budget at this point? No, okay. So what we're here to talk about today is the fiscal 25 budget, also thinking about where we all stand for the next 5 years. Where are we going with this budget? We all have talked about previously that we've balanced the budget in previous years using some amounts of free cash to help balance the budget. And part of that was the hopeful attempt that we would have had an override that would have helped fund additional revenue to help balance the budget on a more permanent basis. We all know that the override didn't pass, and so we're faced with the continued lack of revenues and the difficult part of how do we balance this budget in a sustainable way over a long-term period. And potentially minimizing or not using free cash in the operating budget to balance that budget. So part of that discussion and thinking about long-term, thinking a 5-year plan is an important element to really think about where's the town going, where are the expenses needed, where is the growth. And I know Jim, excuse me, Jim and Dick have been working on a 5-year plan, and I'm not sure where you both are, at least on starting that process, if we're ready to talk about that at all, or how that's
Leave that up to
going.
the chair, and
Yeah.
Yeah, we can talk about it. It's not a finished product, but we're getting pretty close. And Jim is putting on the final touches, and we got to add some numbers to these. But we both spent time on building a narrative, and we want to point out that the narrative is with two people, for the most part, put together. It really should be the narrative of the whole group. So, as far as I'm concerned, anything that we wrote could be subject to discussion and change. I don't know how much you want to go into that tonight without having it in front of you, because it isn't quite done. But we should have it to everybody, I think, in another week or so.
Sure, okay.
But anyway, I'll just give you a couple of thoughts. In the capital 5-year plan, there's not a lot of new ground to be uncovered there. It's really probably putting everything on a spreadsheet with 5 or 6 years and making decisions in the context of 5 years, not just doing it on an annual basis. And I also introduced the thought, and Jim agreed with, that if we have items in the capital area that don't make the cut in year 1, they should be the first to look at in year 2. That shouldn't be automatic, but it's logical, because otherwise people will get demoralized, I think, because they put, in good faith, their items in there, and if they constantly get ignored, then maybe we ought to talk about should those items even be in there. But anyway, I don't think there's a lot of new material in the capital plan, but it does a good job, and Jim did this part, of enumerating the sources of funds, because we're looking at $50 million over the next 5 years in capital needs. We don't have that kind of money, so therefore it's implicit that we need to get some state aid, federal aid, ARPA money, whatever, to fill those gaps, particularly on the larger items. And I'll stop there. And then on the budget part is a little bit more familiar, I would say. But what we've done here is we took a crack at saying, well, if we had to cut, where would we go to do that? And we do have some ideas in there. We're not saying we're going to cut anything. We start by saying all the departments we have exist for a reason and serve a function. And some of them have revenue sources, like the veteran services. 75% of that is paid for by the state. But we do put out a couple of ideas that some people might view as controversial. A couple of which is, one is, what is the future of the Council on Aging? And should that be a department of the town in the future? Or are they better off going their own way and raising money and getting a new building and whatever they need? I laid that on the group recently. That it was not well received, but I did not mean any hostility either. It's really saying that probably as the Council on Aging grows, we're not going to be able to keep putting money into it. So the council's going to have to get used to a lesser and lesser percentage of the total coming from the town. So at some point you say, well, maybe they could be on their own, independent of the town, raise money and still be in some way connected to the town. There's also the transfer station that was been mentioned, the police, not the police, but the ambulance services, that always comes up. We mentioned that. No, we're not saying to do any of these things. We're saying these are the things where you go to look to see if it can be done in some measure, and maybe a half measure can work here. So we lay that out for you, and next week or so we should have something for you. And Jim, I'll stop there and ask if you wish to say anything.
Yeah, I think one of the things we noticed, what we tried to do was projecting forward. What type of revenues are we gonna have? What type of funds are gonna be available for expenses and salaries? And just looking back 10 years and looking at our revenue this year and what we had last year, I feel pretty comfortable that we can do a 3% increase yearly in the budgets. We could probably do a 3.5% increase yearly in the budgets. That would be roughly $800,000 for the school and $650,000 for the town side. We cannot sustain anything more than that. So if we do go more than that on one side or the other, we're gonna have to make cuts on the opposite side. That's all the money there is. We've also looked at the free cash. We put $500,000 into the operating budget, a little over $500,000 last year. You know, to absorb that into the operating budget could take 4 or 5 years to get that down to a point where we can zero that out. Because while you have free cash one year, we incorporate that into the new revenues the following year. So it's not free every year. You know, if you have $500,000 last year, that does not mean it's gonna be available this year. We're fortunate this year. I think we're gonna have we do have a high free cash number. It's not been certified. That will give us some flexibility, but that's one time. That's not gonna be available every year. I've already made adjustments in the revenues this year based on last year's revenues, so we had some excess local receipt money, but that's already been factored into this year's budget for the incoming revenue, so we can't count on that every year. That's where we are. Like I said, we're probably looking at about 3.5% on the high side for budget increases for the town and the school side going forward.
So without numbers in front of us and going into detail, what this exercise is showing us, or will show us, is that each year is continually going to get more difficult and more difficult, and the cuts there needs to be savings or cuts starting to be built in or incorporated. So we need to be thinking about this budget, starting to already incorporate that, because next year is going to get even more difficult or not even sustainable. So without going too much further into a 5-year plan, I think that just lays the groundwork for really where this budget needs to sit and how we manage a sustainable budget here, knowing that next year and the year after will continue to get furtherly difficult. Tom or Nancy, or maybe you can give us an update on where you are in the school process with the school budget.
Jim has kind of informed us where you are. Like I said, the 2.5 last year. Last year we cut $275,000 from our staff, which were TAs. We're decimated on TAs other than those that are required by special needs. So our general ed population has very little support in the classroom other than the classroom teachers. The next thing that we can do, we were asked, see what you can cut that you're not mandated to do. Well, what we're not mandated to do is pre-K. We can cut that, except we have to continue to do special needs pre-K. We're mandated to do that, and we're mandated to put so many role models in the classroom with those kids. So we can cut from that program, but we'll have to tell all the parents in Westport that your pre-K kids will have to go to some private daycare or somewhere else. That's option one. Option two, we don't have to do full day kindergarten. We can go half day kindergarten and lose 2 or 3 of our kindergarten teachers. Again, we'll have to go to the town of Westport and those parents and tell them to find alternative sources of full day care for their children. So these are obviously not very pleasant options, but when you asked us what could we get rid of, and then the next and final option is that we start getting rid of actual staff in the classroom and our classroom sizes go up. You know our budget, it's personnel. We're in a contractual year. You just settle the contract with the police. They're looking at that. We're dealing with that contract. You know, it all is to scale, obviously. So we're having a very difficult time. I mean, I know that we had the $500,000 of free cash, and you know, you're starting us off at a negative $500,000 this year. I understand the accounting principle, I clearly understand it. However, when you're cutting $275 from a budget, and then you're now cutting another 500, literally, because we needed the 500 last year, and then you're saying that, and then you're saying, oh, the school department's $2.1 million. I can easily easily say 2.1, take away the 500,000 that you're trying to make up this year from the shortage of the free cash being used. You're at 1.6. $750,000 of that is new sped. We've had 3 new kiddos come in, significant needs. We can't pick them. They come in the door, as you all know, and they need out of district. This is not children that we can support here. Medically necessary need to be out of district. That's $750,000 on top of our sped budget last year. Add that to the 500,000. If in relative, you look at what our increase is, we have new contracts that we're talking about, and we've worked with Jim, and we're trying to have a collaborative effort of what we're looking at, what that could cost with longevity, steps and lanes, and we've looked at that number. And we're really, if you take away the $500,000 issue and you take away the $750 in sped, we're really not worse than we were in any other year. But this year, that sped, that 750 increase is crushing us. And the only way we can make up for it in the educational side is to do it to the general ed population, which is the majority of the population. Our sped budget has gone from 22 to 27% in 1 year as a result of it. And there's nothing we can do about it. We've looked, Tom advocates all the time with the state, we're looking for additional money. They just cut the funding for the transportation for the sped, and as I had said, sometimes we're taking a kid to go to Perkins School for the Blind, and it's costing us $125,000 for one child. Or under the McKinney Act, when you have a homeless child, we had 2 children in the district last year that were here were placed because they were pulled out of a home. They were placed here with foster parents, and then their actual biological family was in Brockton, and they were going to accept them in. So we were like, okay, we got these 2 kids are going over to Brockton, and we're going to have that. No, they appealed, and those children wanted to stay in Westport, and for 6 months we had to transport them by cab back and forth from Brockton. So these are the types of things in the school department that when you look at some of those numbers, it makes all of our stomach go in a knot, saying, oh my God, this is just another thing. And here we are, and we fought that appeal of those kids, and we literally had to send a cab to Brockton for 6 months. So you just add up the numbers, it's just incredible. It's staggering. So again, we'll do the best that we can, and then, the voters are gonna have to decide what they want. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know where else I can go. I try to be, and I know the committee, we're very fiscally responsible, and we've had conversations with Jim. The union are not happy with us. We've told them, this is all we have. There are benefits to working in Westport, and that's just, maybe you make a little less money, but there is a benefit to being here. And they truly have understood that in years past. But this year is very difficult in light of that recent arbitration award. We're having a lot of difficulties. No, there isn't good at news, but when you look from our side of what we can cut, it's staff and it's pre-K and K.
Mm-hmm.
That's all we got. That's all we can cover.
So if we took Jim, I don't have your numbers in front of me, but following the same philosophy, if we took last year's budget for the school, excluding the free cash, added in the 54% of this year's net revenue, that gets us to the number that you put into the school budget. Do you have that?
About 380.
What's the total
380.
budget? 21 million. Yeah.
They were gonna get an additional 380 without,
Okay.
and then if they got 500 free cash, it'd be 880.
Yeah.
Right, so as we're talking 380 and the town side is 4 something because of the minus of the 500, yes.
No.
Yes, the town
Well-
gets more, because we have to pay back, you're having us.
The
not
town
get the
still gets
500.
46%.
But
of
in the
the
net
net
revenue
revenue.
share, because we're not getting the 500, we're literally taking
Right,
less than the
because
town.
you have a free cash deficit from the previous year.
Understandable, we do.
Right. So I'm just playing the worst case scenario. So the number that Jim's got plugged into the budget now, would you be able to make that work if you had to do those drastic cuts that you were mentioning?
So if you're
Would that
telling,
make it work?
if you're telling me, if I cut out my pre-K and I cut out my kindergarten and I cut out some staff, yeah, if I cut out teachers and load up my classrooms to 30 per kids and cut out kindergarten, sure, I'll probably be able to meet that number. but come to town meeting, I don't think parents are gonna be on board to having that, that type of an impact on their families. I don't think that that's realistic. Nothing's optimal.
I'm not suggesting that the scenario, I'm just trying to understand
No, I don't want you to
the
be
worst
on
case.
like the social media hit list. I'm
No,
just
no,
saying-
right,
I'm saying that
yeah.
it's not gonna, if that becomes what the issue is, and that's what we have to do, we have to do, right, Karen? At the end of the day, there's gonna be a number that's decided at town meeting, and we're gonna have to make the cuts that are appropriate. Those are the 3 areas where the cuts need to be made. And eventually you can keep cutting away staff, we'll get to the number. What my thing is that we're trying to talk about capital, we're going back 10 years, right? We're going back 10 years and we're looking and we're trying to study. We're in an all-time, highest inflation we've had in so long. So I just think it's disingenuous to go back 10 years and look at something like that and then go forward and try to look at that picture in time and say that we can really base our information on that as being solid information moving forward. I think personally, and I'm not an accountant by any stretch of the imagination, I think we need to be a little bit more flexible with our school-town distribution. I know everybody likes to stay with the formula and stay with it, but sometimes when you have a sped situation such as this, maybe this is the year that we make a slight adjustment in that, so the impact isn't so hard, and then the following year we go back to that. There is no law, there is no formula, this is the way it's gone. Many other towns will adjust their division between both sides depending on what type of impact. Maybe instead of just putting money in the general fund, that we start doing what some other towns have done, which is put in a special purpose line item for extraordinary special needs expenses. So you're actually showing the folks that you're putting money in the rainy day fund, not that you're holding it there in the kitty, but you're actually putting it in a line item for years such as this when this happens. And it's not always, it's not every year, this just happened to explode this particular year. There's also, and I don't know enough about it, but I know Jim has tried to explain it to me, I'm still not there, but the town takes in revenue, meals, taxes, whatever you do, so you have a budget based on what you estimate. And then you figure a budget based on 80% is my understanding of that money in order to spend. So people don't really understand that pot of free cash is turnbacks in, funding that we did for the year that the project didn't get done or it didn't cost that much, that money comes back in that we allotted. And in addition, it's this cushion that we have that for somebody that doesn't pay their taxes or somebody that doesn't pay their exit, and meals taxes, it's commuter oriented, it's either high, low, whatever. I guess my point with that cushion is that have we ever looked or done an analysis of how much of that cushion we've actually needed in the last 10 years? Like how many people didn't pay their taxes where we had to dig into that cushion to fill in that hole so that we could make it whole? And a lot of towns, say we're gonna do 90%, and I think Westport this year needs to move off the 80% to the 90%. And put more of the taxpayer money into the operating budget. My personal opinion, I think we have to become a little bit more flexible to high inflation, this is what we need to do, but have the theory that we wanna go back from it as we can in other years. So I do think that standing hard and fast to a formula and saying this is it is really gonna put us in a position where you have things that happen at town meeting that have happened in the past, because we're not being flexible. And I'm not saying that the whole idea is that I think everybody gets the idea of if we do it this year, it's gonna stay there, we can never go back. I think if you have an open dialogue with people and you explain to them and they understand, they'll understand that you have to have flexibility. And that goes both ways, that goes on the town too. Like sometimes there has to be flexibility with stuff, that happens. There's always going to be some type of epic explosion that happens every year financially. And I think that we have to move, or I would urge the select board and the finance committee to think about moving those percentages, especially in light of the gap that we're sustaining this year and what we have to do in order to operate next year. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to I just want to kind of underscore a couple of things that Nancy just said, because I think they're a really good way of thinking about this differently. I don't know exactly what you called it, but I kind of like this idea of in years where we have free cash available, like this is a really good year example, maybe we should be using that free cash for a special purpose sped fund and start funding that, like kind of like we did that for vacation payouts or something. We have a fund, and I don't know what the mechanism is, but that would be a way to show that, okay, we're not directly funding the operating budget, but we are setting aside money that could be used for that purpose. So I do think we should really explore doing something like that and funding that separately from just a regular operating budget. I think that's a really good idea. The other thing, I didn't look at the numbers before I came, but I do think that looking at the 54-46 split is very hard because the town needs every dollar just as much as the school needs every dollar. But I think that we had a difference this year where we had an increase in the Chapter 70 funding, right? And I think that increase in the Chapter 70 funding, I think we should have looked at that differently and said that particular part of the increase was specifically targeted towards education. And so maybe, I don't even know if it works to whose advantage it works to in this case, but maybe you do need to look at particularly the state aid targeted to education or targeted now. Now we also have state costs that are specific to education as well, and so I don't know how that nets out, but I do think one of the things we should look at on that split is particularly that state aid. If we're getting state aid money for education, then we should think about looking at that differently. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Al has his hand up. Just to comment on that. I think there's a variety of ways that we could relook at reallocating to be creative, but the bottom line is, if the budget is barely balanced now, if more money goes to the school, then less money goes to the town. So however you want to creatively reallocate, the bottom line is more to the school means less to the town, will mean that then somewhere along the town, a department has to get cut. So what would that be? So however we want to spend time and be creative, the bottom line is what would the town get cut?
Okay, so that's that piece of it, but the other piece is the cushion that creates part of the free cash, is maybe we need to move that line up off of 80%.
I think that
In
is
the
off.
past, it was more.
That is off.
So they were up to 97%.
Yeah,
And
we
they were
did.
back down last year to
So
what?
last year, we got down to 80%, and this year's budget, we're up to about 85, 86% already.
So they were 80% last year, and so now we're at 80. With this
We're
budget we
budgeting
did.
about 85, 86%.
So you were as high as 97, you were down at 80 last year, you're at 85 and 86, maybe it needs to be 90 this year. Those are the things I wanted to throw out there to explore. And I do think that, Shauna, that was a good point on the Chapter 70 money, and we have had these discussions with Jim. And it's hard, because it's all kind of, it comes in education, but then there's all that, and I get, there's all these intertwining things. But the biggest thing, and Al brought that out when we were building the new school, he was looking at the attendance records and he's like, are we gonna bring more kids to Westport? And I think that we can honestly, positively say, we have increased our enrollment. With the new bill, we really have. And it's been impactful, and we've gotten ourselves, and I know that there's a problem, we really can't get a hard number, right, from the state on what we're getting.
For Chapter 70?
Yeah.
No, they will not give us a
And
number.
when is that, January?
Close in February. Third or fourth week of January, the governor's budget will come out, and that usually the Chapter 70 number's pretty close. And I
Yeah.
will say that when I called, they kind of indicated that, he said state inflation was like at 1%, which still seems very odd, and he said that there's potential that communities that came out of the minimum aid last year could bounce back into that category.
So just for those that we were in the minimum aid, so we were getting, if you looked at all the other schools in the area, we were getting like the least amount in the minimum aid spending. And then we finally got out of that category, and now we're right on that line, and inflation's tied in with a bunch of other stuff in this crazy formula that the statute has that has not been changed in decades, again, things that haven't changed that need to change. But it is something that I think that we have to consider. I think that when the schools are increasing enrollment and we're bringing money back, we're bringing kids back in Westport. We did lower our school choice this year as well. I know that Jim and I had a discussion, Nancy will be on social media hits, but this whole Diamond expense, and I know that Westport supports its vocational education. We now as a district are beginning to track what our students over at Diamond are doing when they get out of Diamond. And I think a lot of people are gonna be surprised how many actually go into trades versus going to BCC or UMass Dartmouth. We have a lot of kiddos that are getting into Diamond and they are not going into the trades, which was the very purpose of the vocational schools. And we're gonna start tracking our Westport numbers so that when you look, Jim, what was the number for Diamond that we were paying? Do you remember?
I think we're close to 2 million.
$2 million, and we have, Tom, how many students over there? 126?
I think we have under 130. The amazing thing to me is the fact that they're graduating less than 33% who are going into the trades, and yet per pupil expenditure is $5,000 more per student.
Then we
There's
are paying,
something-
yeah.
And this isn't just a Diamond issue. This is a vocational education in Massachusetts issue, because it's the same thing over at Bristol, Plymouth, and many of the others. And the reality is, if the percentages are the same in terms of going into the workforce, then somebody needs to rationalize with me why the vocational school should get an additional $5,000 when that, in fact, they're not playing out. And if I may, just for 1 second.
Certainly.
A couple of other things I think people need to understand. Jim, thank you for sending that 10-year thing to me. My question is that 10-year percentage, does that include free cash or does that not include free cash?
That includes free cash.
Okay, so over the past 10 years, with the free cash, we've been averaging somewhere around 3.2% increase. So that sounds okay until you take a look at the fact that 83% of our budget is personnel. And so when you take a look at that and you look at steps and lanes, and assuming we use the number from last year, which was at 2%, which again, we're in negotiations, so I don't want anyone saying I'm just using the number from this past year. On average, we're looking at an increase of about 4.5% just in salaries, steps, lanes, and mandated salaries. Add to that an additional $700,000 in special education, which is one of the many unfunded mandates that districts have to answer to, including, as Chair Stan Cross mentioned, the McKinney-Vento Act, which requires us to transport anyone who is homeless. And you can see that over the past 10 years, it's actually less than 3.2% on an average per year. Yet, just the salaries alone, which make up 83% of the school's budget, and that's not unique. That's usually, you check out what the average is in terms of what the budgets are for schools. They range anywhere from 78 to about 85%, somewhere around there. So we're not far off there. We're working off of a deficit every single year. And so, that has had a very detrimental effect. And I got to give the school committees, past and present, and the staffing, an unbelievable shout out at the ability to actually keep the ship afloat. And what's a little bit pressing for us is that sitting on my bulletin board is a story from the Shoreline in 2019, which suggests that the problem with the school budget had to do with 450 students who in that decade had gone to other areas. Over the past 3 years, we have increased 155 students, last year 60 students. We will continue to increase because we will continue to put out a high quality product that will be attractive to families. However, there's a real politic here that we have to deal with, and if you play that over time, you just can't make it. I've got an elementary school with 500 students and one principal. I want anyone to show me an elementary school in the state that has 500 students and one principal, and that's it. We're on the margins, and when he is out because he's sick, that means everybody has to fill in, and that's what we've been doing, and we will continue to do that. Exactly what Nancy said, but we're at critical mass at this point.
But just to go back to the vocational piece of our contract that we have to provide vocational education, we're part of this group that forms the we need to really explore that, because the 126 kids that they're taking for Westport, they're not necessarily, we in our minds would like to think it was, when I was in school, I won't say when, but in the 80s sometime, when you went to Diamond, those were the kids that really didn't like academia and had talent for, mechanics or whatever. They wanted to go into the trades. They handpick the students out of Westport that they take. And you can't have absenteeism at all. They have to have a certain GPA to go. So they're literally not taking our children that really need that vocational education. They're staying in Westport. They're not going to Diamond. They're handpicking and cherry picking our kids, and they're picking our better academic kids that are going over there to explore the trades, and they end up over at college. So we're gonna start tracking that, and I think that as a town, we're gonna have to talk about whether that's a reality for us to continue.
Well, we've
Because we-
signed on to debt now. I mean, I think that's a very large mountain to be able to conquer at this point, since we've already agreed on their debt proposal for their new school. I mean, you can't walk away from that debt easily.
I'm not saying that we should walk away from the debt.
No,
I'm
but I'm
saying
saying
that
if-
maybe if we actively look to go in a different direction, we'll pay our share of the debt as long as we have to, but it doesn't need to last a lifetime. Because if the school's not gonna change and we're gonna continue to cherry pick kids and they're not going into the trades, which is the very reason for the vocational school, we're gonna continue to be on the same wheel that we always are, creating new debt, building bigger buildings, and not putting out the product that we promise. So, yes, I agree that we have to pay our debt, but we also need to look at these as potential, when we're looking at 5-year and 10-year plans, maybe we need to look at that. And finally, Karen, the last piece of what the school is looking to do to reduce its overhead. I know that Tom sent an email to Jim. So the building reuse, the old building where we have our administration building, during the school bill, totally, we advocated to have an admin space in the new building. It would have cost an additional $1,000,000 some odd, something like that. It was determined that that should not go onto the building because it wasn't reimbursable by the state. So nobody wanted to do it. So here we have is admin, and our early and aftercare is over at the old high school. We also use the fields. I know that Jim has been in negotiations with UMass Dartmouth that appears to be using the old school as a storage facility of some sort, which would take up chunks of space within that building. That led us to analyze what we're paying for that building. Right now, we're paying $50,000 a year as, towards the utility expenses of that building, plus we maintain the building and have a custodian over in that building. And so we've organized a plan to pull out of that building and spread our admin, not optimal, totally not seen anywhere. Pieces over, business office over at the MAC, some pieces of sped over at the West, and some admin over at the new high school, and operating our admin office out of 3 satellites because that will save us $90,000. So that's where we're at. So everybody's nodding their head thinking, that's a good idea. Okay, we'll scatter them. If we think that that's, I don't necessarily think it's a great plan, but it's our only option.
So that we should discuss too, because it might save you 90, but it might cost us more than 90. So that needs to be evaluated, I think, overall as a town, not just as an individual department. Insurance goes up if it's not occupied. We need custodians over there, it's gotta be heated. I don't know if you're still looking to do your after-school program there, or if that's moving.
No, we're moving everything, the whole kit and caboodle, out into the other 3 schools and save ourselves 90. But then if it's like, okay, so now it's gonna cost the town probably $225 to run that building, without us there, plus insurance. You want us to cut our budget, and we're doing this, but then on the other side, you're getting that. So it's something that's on my agenda for tomorrow night for the school committee to vote for, whether we should move or not. So I just wanted to
Great.
be very
So I think there's,
transparent.
Hugh has wanted to have a question, and then Al Lees had his hand up, and Gary also has his hand up, so I want to take some questions.
Well, one comment is, I don't think we're looking at good answers to things. We're looking at less bad answers. And that starts with the school committee, certainly, but as Karen mentioned a moment ago, money that comes from the town side go to the school side and vice versa. There's no spare change on either side. And the people on the town side are struggling in their areas as significantly as we're talking about. As far as the allocation of the budget versus revenues, first of all, it's always an estimate. We really don't know what the figures are until after the fact. So when Jim talks about what it turned out to be for this year or that year, I'm sure that's true, but it isn't necessarily the way it was budgeted initially, because we don't know what the revenues are sometimes until after the fact. And the other point there is, it's either pay me now or pay me later, because that's where the free cash comes from. Free cash comes from amounts of revenue that were received that were not allocated or were allocated but not spent. So if you're running at 80%, whatever the figure might be, for an allocation against the estimated revenues, then you hopefully have a fairly juicy amount of free cash after the fact, which then is the capital account, which goes for all the capital things we're talking about. Sure, you can run up the allocation against the estimates to a higher number, which is basically bringing down next year's free cash into this operating budget. And there are times we have done that, have had to do that. Last year at the school and elsewhere, which is not a good idea, but there are things you just have to do because they have to be done. However, to the extent that you do that, you are taking away the free cash potential, which is the capital investment potential. And so you, as everybody's been saying, and quite accurately, you do it to get by this year or the next year, but the whole of things you haven't done keeps growing. The idea that there are new sources of revenue is up really to the state, which is now talking poverty, strangely enough. Our revenues are less than we anticipated. But the other side of it, I'm not an advocate of reducing the preschool or kindergarten and so forth. I understand what you're talking about, but it wasn't too many years ago where they didn't exist. They were personal expenses to begin with. Those were absorbed, and it wasn't last year, it was many years ago, that those were taken into the school department that used to be parental expense rather than town expense. I'm not, advocating doing that. I'm just saying that it's not quite as catastrophic as it sounds, as opposed to inflating the numbers in the school, in the classrooms, etc. It's a service that is being provided to the townspeople through the school department that is also available elsewhere. That's really all I'm saying.
Thank you, Hugh. Al, did you still want to speak? I see your hand went down, but.
I always want to speak. I just want to say a few things. One of them is that I sadly feel as though that the town of Westport, just like almost 150 towns and cities in this state, feel like Oliver Twist. I just feel like I'm just putting a dish in front and saying, please, sir, may I have more? And we need more. We need more. The state has failed us. And I know that we have a budget to deal with. We need to have, juggle whatever we have. And I also know that the town administrators and whatever are doing their best to juggle the bucket. But my reality is that if we had simply had the state over the last 15 years come up with an increase of 1.5% to 2%, we wouldn't be talking about any of this anymore. They simply, and I'll say it, and I'm going to call it out because that's what I do. The chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee lives in our town. And if you look at the Mass Municipal Association website, and all of the things, the underfunded, unfunded mandates that are currently, imposed on the town, which is what Nancy Stanton Cross, Tom Aubin, Jim Hartnett, etc., have spoken about, we wouldn't be in this position. We would not be in this position at all, except for the state mandate. And I will say, and then I'm just going to end it because I'm a little bit on a rant, of course, but a year and a half ago, when our fiscal committee had Mike Rodrigues, as part of our group for that particular day, what he said, which has never left me, is that Westport doesn't have a funding problem, it has a spending problem. Well, let that one sit a little bit with everybody, because if that's how the great senator thinks, then we've got a real problem, not just with our town, but with a lot of other towns in the state. So I'm just going to leave it with that. But we have a fundamental problem within this Commonwealth that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Al. Gary, you have your hand up, so you're next.
Yes, all right, thanks everybody, thanks, yeah. So, I think we should go back to where this started, and it started with the hard work that everyone did, both on the committees, the boards, the residents in town to try to push through an override, which failed. And now, which left us with us trying to decide what gets cut, what gets shifted. But I would seem to think that we would have had a plan B in place to discuss exactly what that would be. If that meant, 5, I'm only making these numbers up, 5 teachers, 2 policemen, somebody from the Council on Aging. So when is that, or when will that be implemented? Because the residents have said, no new taxes, no new revenues as far as the tax base is concerned. So the other alternative is implementation of Plan B. And has that been drawn out? Has that been implemented? Where do we stand with that? I guess, is there a list? And where we started off was, well, in my opinion, and I agree with Al 100%, we're our local representatives in this, 2 of which live in the community. Where do we stand with trying to pick out the lowest hanging fruit, Council on Aging? I mean, this is a town-wide problem. This is not just a school problem. This is not just a public safety issue. This is a town-wide problem. And I don't think we should be earmarking, especially service-based programs like the Council on Aging, who've already cut many programs, to target them or even recommend that be one of the solutions. So I would like to know, does someone have a list or does somebody have a plan that was going to be implemented if the override didn't go through? Because we have to stick with that. That's what the residents wanted in this town. And it was clear when they voted no.
Thank you, Gary. I think we're here tonight to try to come up with that plan, right? So our plan, and I'm not advocating in any option, right? Our plan is the extreme thing that Nancy Stanton Cross talked about with those extreme cuts to balance the budget. There's options to shift the 54% split in any creative way we want to come up with is fine, which would give more dollars to the school and less to the town. We need to come up with what town cuts would that be, or a combination of things, or using free cash into the operating budget to help the budget. But knowing that if we use free cash, we've known each year is progressively getting more difficult. The more free cash we use in the budget, we rely on the free cash because it's necessary to fund the operating expenses. We know next year gets even tougher. So we can continue to use free cash, but at some point, very soon, we're going to be out of that ability to do that. And so we need to right the ship, right? So we know there's no override, so we have to start to right the ship. And there's no right way to right it. It's all bad solutions in any way you go, but this is what we're here to discuss. So this is all of us trying to come up with that plan.
Right, I agree with that 100%, Karen, but I guess the question I have is, shouldn't that have been part of the override to begin with? That when we put the override through, we knew, for example, we would have to cut 5 teachers, we would have to cut 2 policemen. So why are we now trying to rehash that potential plan that we had, or if there was one, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm unclear on why we're trying to rejigger the proposed cuts that were I don't know, were they clearly stated at the override? I mean, because if people were gonna vote on an override and they knew that, okay, I was gonna lose a police officer, or I was gonna lose 5 teachers, shouldn't that be the plan now to implement?
If I can reply, Gary, I get what you're saying. Having a consequence, I don't think was fully identified at the time of the override vote. I think, I don't think that there was something that was before the folks at town meeting that said, 3 teachers, no pre-K, none of this, and then if you don't do this. I don't think that that was there. I think there was such an amount of time and effort put in by that committee to study the funding in Westport and try to come up with a formula. And then when we finally did, then it was, how are we going to adjust it? Are we going to take the 500 from the schools? What are we? And then when you looked at that chart, it gave 450 to the schools, but people talked about that you have to pay back the free cash. And they were like, so I'm voting for nothing more in the schools because I'm just paying back for the free cash from last year. So I think the first instinct is, yep, we need to implement and show people what the result of that is. I think that as a board member, at least I speak for myself and the school committee, is we're trying to come up with different variations and options. Some of obviously involve the town, and you can agree with them or disagree. But I certainly like controlled chaos rather than chaos. I like to know what's in the box at Christmas. I don't want to be surprised. I would like to know what I have to do and to be very pragmatic to plan out how that's going to look, good, bad, or indifferent. So sometimes we all don't get what we want, but if we don't try to control it by making some elevated changes here or there, then we're left with the form of town government that we have, with folks coming from the floor, hearing, you're not gonna have this, you're not gonna have that, and we're gonna have votes for line items going here, there, and everywhere. And we're gonna have our account, going with their pen and pencil and a calculator, saying we have to take this, we have to take that. Is that really where we wanna be? Because that kind of chaos, as a taxpayer, I don't want. And I surely know that in that room are gonna be a bunch of parents saying, I want kindergarten, I want pre-K, and that vote's gonna definitely go in favor of the schools. And I still don't want that as a taxpayer, because I don't think it's good for the town of Westport. I think there has to be a balance. I don't think it should be controlled by people coming to that town meeting and just monopolizing that money and making that move. And if we don't control it, I really fear that that's what's gonna happen. So yes, Gary, you were right, there should have been a punch list, but I think we were all buried so deeply in trying to figure out percentages and how to allocate, we didn't get to the punch list. And I do think we have to try for a 2.5 again. And when we do, I think we need to be very clear of what the result will be if that doesn't happen. And I think that will probably happen.
I mean, hindsight being 20/20 now, if a resident knew that, okay, my parent wouldn't be able to be picked up from the Council on Aging and brought to a doctor's appointment, that might have swung the vote a little bit. Or you're laying off 5 school teachers, now you're gonna increase class size. I think that, I'll be honest, I'll be the first one to admit, I wasn't heavily involved in the override process, but, I think that's what really hits home when people feel the pain. And I think what we're trying to do now is rejigger after the fact. And it would have been nice to have that punch list implemented. It would have been bad. I mean, it's bad either way. But if we implemented it now, the pain would have been felt. And maybe down the road, people would say, you know what? I can't live without a driver from the Council on Aging. I think that, but hindsight is 20/20 at this point.
Thank you, Gary. Hugh, and then Cindy.
I don't think there ever was a plan B, but I don't think it really made any great difference. Because I don't think that people in the town as a whole who voted, not at the town meeting, but on the override in the ballot, believed anything was being said. The credibility of government at this point is at an all-time low, all across everywhere. So all the promises of what would happen if you don't go for this were ignored. And whether you made more promises with more precision of certain areas isn't going to make any difference. They didn't believe in the first place. The only way, and I am not, again, advocating this, but maybe the cuts that we are not advocating, that's what we were talking about, would happen without the override. So yes, if there was a cut of kindergarten, et cetera, there will be parents who will come and try to hijack money from elsewhere to fill in that hole. That's true of every other cut that might be made, that the people who are interested in that area will try to hijack other budgets. We right now are understaffed in terms of what we should have for police. We are understaffed in terms of what we should have for fire. Those are the two biggest budgets other than the school budget. All the comments we've been making are intelligent and focused, but the basic problem is we don't have the money, and the classic shifting the deck chairs to the Titanic don't really change anything. You move from one place that doesn't have enough and now is really deficient to another that really didn't have enough but now is closer to appropriate amount. That's where we are.
Thank you, Hugh. Go ahead, Cindy.
So this really comes down to a relatively small pot of money that's available left on the table. So if you take 54% of the budget for school, add 15% of the budget for core payments for retirement assessments, insurance, the regional school assessments that we receive, that's now 15% of the budget. It wasn't that long ago, it was only 7% of the budget. Those are also things that are mandated to the town that we have no recourse. We have to make those payments. So if you add that, you take the combined police and fire is about another 12-13% of the total budget. Now you're just over 80% of the total budget of the town, $52 million. So you've got about less than 20%, or less than, I'll just use round numbers, $10 million left. That's it. Unless you want to start talking about cutting police and fire as well. If we eliminated the Council on Aging, the Recreation Department, the library, and the transfer station, it would not be enough to satisfy the request of the school department. So it comes down to about $10 million. That's all that's left on the table. Every $1 million that another department asks for comes out of that small amount that is left. So we have to start cannibalizing everything. And Gary is right. The voters have spoken. You is right. The voters have spoken. If they don't want increased taxes, then there is a price to pay. And that price has to be borne by some of the areas that can least afford it, unfortunately. And we all understand the mandates and the issues that are dealt with. The town side has, unforeseen problems. Where's the money going to come from for East Beach Road? I don't know. I mean, there are things that happen all the time on the town side that they make do with. I'll bring it up at almost every meeting. I don't know if you enjoy walking into the side door here of this building that is rotting. The stairs are practically rotting inside the town hall. We've gone with Band-Aid approaches for years and years and years, and I guess we'll have to continue to do that, and I get that. But there is really just a very small pot of money that's left over after you talk about those core payments, police, fire, school. There's only a little bit left. So we can argue about that little bit that's left, but every million or 100,000 that comes out of that small pot is going to very deeply impact some other department. And that's just the way it is. We have an finite amount of money, and we have to learn to live within that. And we all have to learn to live within that. And if it means that certain programs get cut, whether it be on the town side, whether it be limited hours at the library or transfer station or recreation or COA, as well as programs at the school. I understand you are supposed to advocate as much as you possibly can on the school side for education for the students of the town. I get that. That's your job. You are supposed to advocate the best programs you can. Well, we don't have the money to do that anymore. Maybe we never did, I don't know. But there's just a little bit of money left on the table that we're all fighting about here. Because outside of that, it's all spoken for. I don't think anyone here wants to cut police services or fire services or EMT. So we're on the fringes here. So we can talk about what should have been and what should have happened. That's irrelevant now. It doesn't matter that the state didn't pay us for 15 years because it's not going to magically appear now this year. So we've got to figure out how we're going to move forward with what we have, and we have very, very little.
So it seems that your scope is not to look at other things that we haven't changed in years of taking some of the free cash and increasing our operating budget.
No, absolutely
Shifting the
not.
Chapter 70 money a little bit with a different percentage between town and school. You're advocating we continue to do the same
Because how
old,
can
same
the
old.
town side afford to give, there's only $10 million left.
If you look at it the way that you said, if you continue to use 83 or 85% of the
Right.
cushion, why don't you use 90? Then it's not 10 million, it's more than that.
Oh,
And if the
Yeah, it's
70,
not
That
much.
local
Our
amount
lo-
of tax money does not amount to very much.
It's
It's,
$300,000 you're
Yeah.
talking about, which is not
$300,000
nothing.
means a whole lot to the school
I
department.
know,
That
but
means
it's-
3 kindergarten
it's not
teachers
go- it's-
and 2 aides.
right, it's not going, it's not going to dramatically change the course of what we're discussing here. Okay, years when school enrollment was down 25%, your Chapter 70 money, when it went down, the school department was not cut from their budget from this allocation then. So it was 54% then. So if it's 54% now, even if Chapter 70 goes up, it was not reduced when your school enrollment went down, when the assessments went up. So it works both ways.
I respectfully disagree. Things change, mandates change,
Wait a
education
minute,
changes.
I
You can't
understand.
stay in the same old rut because we keep doing this.
But
We're
we
not
have
moving.
a finite amount of money is what I'm trying to say. So any amount of money that's taken from one pot is taken out of someone else's pot.
I understand that, but
Right.
sometimes you need to make shifts depending on inflation, where you're at, what your population is, what your needs are. All needs need to be filled. Sometimes, like I said, we've got this extraordinary sped hit of 750. So maybe if we start making plans now, like the special line items, so that when we
And
get
that's
hit with
fine.
that, okay, so what I'm saying
I'm
is
not
that
denying
I'm
that.
advocating that we need to look at just changing the way we operate. If we're gonna continue to do the same thing, yep, go to the taxpayer and say that.
I wasn't talking at all about the free cash and how we could allocate and set up future savings programs so that these things could be addressed going forward. But
Taking a piece of that sped off our plate this year would be tremendous, just taking a piece of that. That is tremendous. 750 on our budget, it's just such, it's such a hit. It really is.
Jim, go ahead.
Just want to step back a little bit on the override. We did identify, so we had a plan B. We identified an SRO officer at the elementary school. We identified additional funding for the IT department. We had council on aging funding for some extra transportation and for services. We had a firefighter that we were going to add to the system. Highway department was going to add an additional staff. None of those were done except the SRO officer, the police department. Took a officer off the patrol and put them in the elementary school for the year. We're still struggling right now for next year whether or not we're going to be able to fund that. I know the new chief is working on that and wants to try and fund that, but we took a hit last year when we didn't get it. So there was, the plan B was there, we just did not fill those positions.
Well, you've heard Plan A, what we would do with the cash if we had it. Plan B is what are the consequences of not having it.
So, Kevin, can I ask you a question?
Sure, go ahead, Gary.
We have a Plan B, or we had a Plan B, and we only implemented one of the items out of the Plan B?
No, we didn't fill the positions that we want. On the town side, we were adding positions and we had like, well, however many, 5 or 6 different items that we said, if we have the override, it will pay for these positions. So we didn't get the override, so we did not add those positions. And I'm not sure how many, but we've also had unfilled positions that we've left unfilled. So we didn't cut like a person. We didn't have a layoff of a person because we had some, whatever, retirements, we had people leave, and we had some gaps there. So the plan B, we were on the town side of the budget, we had identified what we were going to use it for, and so we didn't use it for that. The school department was a little bit more hazy because I think you guys had so many more unknowns about how that was going to affect, but that's what they did. They didn't get to add what they would have gotten
We were
on the
getting
override.
subtracted the 500, so the 450 we were getting, we were still negative 50 coming into the year, so there was nothing for us to say, we were gonna have to cut $450,000 of whatever from our budget to get even at the break point, even to start with what we were gonna get this year.
All right, just to add in, maybe saying the same thing that everyone's saying, but we walked into town meeting with a balanced fiscal '24 budget that already incorporated lots of cuts for both
Okay.
the school and the town. So the override that was discussed to say, if we got the override funds, these are the positions we would add and how we would spend it. We didn't have to talk about what cuts would be made because we already walked in with a balanced budget which already incorporated those cuts. But what we didn't discuss to say, hey, let's fast forward a year or two and then say, these will become the cuts if we don't get the override. Looking ahead a year, we are going to anticipate cuts. So now we are looking ahead a year and here we are. So we didn't discuss that as part of the override.
So we had cuts in place, it's just that they have not been implemented for FY '25. That's basically, we built them net of the budget for fiscal '24, but those cuts have not been implemented to balance FY '25.
Right.
That's basically what we're saying.
We knew, looking ahead to fiscal '25, without the override, this budget would become an issue, which would mean cuts somewhere. We didn't specifically identify those, but we knew this was coming. So here we are.
The only cuts that I see is like, there has to be on the school side because of the free cash and the deficit. So the town, they had proposed there were no cuts. You were putting in positions that you had lost and you were filling in gaps with your side of the proposal. We were trying to make up for the free cash, $500,000 that we were losing, and we cut $275,000 from our budget last year.
So, can I ask another question, Karen?
Go ahead, Gary.
So what are we looking at right now for FY '25? What's the preliminary, how far off are we on the budget?
Well, we're presently, from the town administrator budget that was distributed, the budget is quote balanced. But the 54% allocation to the school leaves the school in a very significant deficit. So if
By how much?
well, as what I had asked Nancy earlier,
2.1.
Right, could the school, if the school were to be forced to meet that number, what would happen? And that's where you described pre-K,
Kindergarten.
kindergarten,
And then staff.
and
But
then
what is the
staff.
number that the school is asking if you use our formula, but if you use your need, what is that number?
I don't know that yet. Do we know that?
Well, we would, if I may, just a couple of things, and I'll try and be brief. First of all, very proud to have been invited to the override committee and the meetings that I attended, because I watched a lot of people who basically spent a lot of time understanding that the history of overrides in Westport is less than optimal. And yet they spent all that time and a good number of them money in an attempt to try and do what was right, not just for the school department, obviously, but for the whole town itself. I certainly want to thank the override committee. I know everybody likes things to fit into nice little spaces. Let me tell you why it's difficult in a school. 2 years and 9 months of age, parents bring their children in to be tested to see if they need special education. We don't know what's coming through the door. We don't know what the disability is. I think people would be interested to see how, in many cases, some of our students are significantly disabled. This problem is not going away. The problem is getting worse. And the problem is getting worse for a lot of different reasons, many of which the schools or the town have no control over. I can tell you, and I've mentioned this before, that we have students currently who are coming in right now, who are coming into kindergarten, who need to be toileted. those students need a TA to be with them. That's an additional cost of somewhere around $30,000 to $40,000 per student. This is why, when we talk about things like an early childhood center, it's not just out of, being altruistic here. There's a real politique here. And the real politique is the sooner we get the kids who have these disabilities, the better the chances that we can ameliorate them at an earlier age so that it doesn't multiply going forward. Cindy, I feel your pain. I feel your pain of not having much left, because I gotta tell you, after 83% of your budget goes in salaries, and the OSD recommends a 14% increase because of inflation, and we're looking at 500,000 that we got, or 400,000 in free cash, I think we're painfully aware of what it's like to have virtually nothing.
Right.
And then still try and maintain high quality education for our kids. So, I do want to say that, it would have been very easy for me, it would have been much easier for me in the committee to simply say, this amount of money from New Revive was going to go directly to this. But then there would have been a lot of hypocrisy on that, because I couldn't really say that, not knowing who's coming in at age 2 years and 9 months, or who's coming in from another community for that matter. We educate them all. And unfortunately, our purveyors have gone up in their cost. And I will end with this. I'll be meeting with the Old Colony superintendents next week. I will be letting them know that as a collective, the 351 towns and communities in Massachusetts should be wholly getting together and saying that we need to fully fund Circuit Breaker. That would go a long way in helping our school and our town.
Okay.
Because a full funding of Circuit Breaker would allow us to continue to be judicious in what we offer. Because again, I get parents want whatever they want for their kids, and they're going to come in with their advocates and their lawyers, and in many cases, the kids who don't get what they need are the ones who don't have the advocates. So we have to advocate for them. But it is a profound disconnect and really a cognitive dissonance that exists when you are at these meetings and you have to allocate services to these kids on the basis of a need, knowing that it's coming from another student somewhere, because the pie is finite. We're at 27% right now of our budget for SPED, with 21% of our students being SPED. This is only going to go up because the cost of educating special education students is going up exponentially. So as this continues, if the state doesn't come and fully fund Circuit Breaker, and we don't have towns and cities coming in and saying that, we're going to continue to be here every year with this frustration. Because in reality, it took the state 25 years in a lawsuit to change the funding formula from the Education Reform Act of 1993. Now, they've passed the Student Opportunity Act, which has been a real great thing for the gateway communities, and they deserved it, certainly. But Westport's getting crushed in the meantime.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So.
just to add what, to what Tom said, I think what makes the situation less ideal is that if we're, in a situation, I understand the situation we're in, but if we're cutting services at the earlier grades in pre-K and kindergarten and reducing our services there and getting at them at a later age, it ends up being a higher cost for us later if we have to provide services for a longer period of time. So that certainly makes the situation less ideal. And I think just to put it in context, if we're looking at revenues coming in from folks moving into the community, if you're looking to raise a family somewhere, you're looking at what services the town could provide. And certainly one of those things is kindergarten, right? If you're looking to start a family, do they provide kindergarten services? So if that's where the cuts are, and unfortunately that, it makes the situation that much worse.
Thank you. 1 second. Al, go ahead. You've got your hand up.
I do, just for a second. I want to echo and just give Tom and the school committee a shout out. Tom and I spent, along with the rest of the group, about 2 years going through a variety of different scenarios and ways of negotiating, if you will, around the budget with our fiscal committee. And you know what? It all comes down, in my opinion, to the fact that we are just underfunded or unfunded mandates from this, and I know this is my hook, if you will. It's like picking a scab. I just keep doing. But it really is true. It is uncontrollable. Every time you turn around and get to a point where you think you're stable, then the next thing comes around, and it's. I have no solutions, but what I do know is that there are problems ahead, and it just tears me up after all these decades, going through the schools and living the life in Westport and everything. It just tears me that everything, it's like a wave after wave after wave, and I don't know the answer. But and Hugh, you said earlier about, well, this is what we have to deal with. I don't disagree with you, but I also have to feel that we as a town need to fight back along with others and say enough is enough, and with the state. So anyway, I'll just throw that out for whatever it's worth.
Thank you, Hugh. Hugh and then
Okay.
Zach. Thank you.
Well, I'm interested in what Tom was saying about the special needs. I wasn't aware there's a mandatory screening, but I suspect that the term special needs has been perverted into children from poor families, poor parents. I don't mean economically. I mean bad parents that have not done what they should have done, and any sensible person would do with a child growing up. And so they've termed this now special needs and dumped it on the schools. Is that really accurate?
I would say, in fact, Mr. Morton, that has actually increased because of the psychological problems that our students are facing, along with all the other disabilities that they
Right.
have. Indeed.
But then to add to it, unfortunately, for what Al's comment, the cities and towns are creatures of the state. The state could merge Westport with Dartford if they chose to do this, that, and nothing we can do about it. Now, that's not gonna happen. But my point is, we can protest all we want, but the people in Beacon Hill care about is votes. We don't have any votes to speak of as compared to the amount of votes that are in the urban areas, which are where the people in Beacon Hill basically come from. So we're fighting up the hill, and I applaud the consolidation of the towns that may have a vote to do something which really make a difference. I hope it works. I mean, all in favor, I wouldn't hold my breath.
Thank you. Zach, go ahead.
Was it 3 or 4 months ago that we met here last?
We met early October.
October,
Yeah.
so 3 months ago. I think it's super important that we stay objective in this conversation, and like everybody here, whether it's on the school side, the town side, or whatever you specialize in, are the experts in that subject matter. But I really like the idea of identifying consequences from an objective standpoint, so we can boom, make a punch list. Like, and not so, we don't meet very often, is why I asked how long ago it was. I think we've got to cover ground, and like on that same topic, it's like, what's the time frame? What's the time frame when we have to make this decision or these consequences happen? I think it's super important that like we could leave this meeting. One, you identified some consequences. Thank you for doing that, because that's what all we're trying to do is objectively say, okay, this is what could happen. When could it happen? Then how do we inform the rest of the town on when and what could happen? And then we can get more into the subjectivity or, thoughts on why it should or shouldn't happen. Does anyone have an idea? It sounds like 25 is kind of balanced now, and there could be a little bit more free cash this year, and we still have some other things we need to identify from the state, but like, does anyone have an idea on a time frame?
Yeah.
Of when?
Yeah, and
this
just
will-
to, 25 is only balanced with the extreme cuts that the school mentioned would have to happen. So it's nowhere near balanced at this point.
Okay.
So, and that's, again, I wasn't advocating for the cuts, just trying to identify what's the worst case scenario? So if this budget were to stand as it is and doesn't change, what does that mean, right? Those cuts are on the table, there needs to be other cuts on the table, there needs to be identifying other things, so we can say, well, we don't wanna do that, but let's do this. None of them are gonna be good.
Can we just talk about the time frame though? There is a specific time
Yeah.
frame. The select board has to present a balanced budget to the FinCom by February 10. So now we could say, we've already got a balanced budget, here you go. I don't think we want to do that, that's why we're talking, right? But February 10, select board has to close our budget and we're gonna have to put in a number. March, help me out, March 10, is it? We have to close the warrant, or the warrant articles. So if we're gonna use free cash, so you have the budget article, which we will complete on February 10, but then you all will keep working on. The deadline for the warrant articles is early March 10. March 10, any warrant articles. So if we were going to set up like a special fund, or if we were going to set up kind of like an enterprise fund or some creative accounting or something like that, we would have to do that in an article on no later than March 10. So that's the dates you're talking about. February 10, select board budget is done. March 10, all the articles, financial articles have to be done.
Then once that happens, once the select board sends over their proposed budget, the finance committee will vote on a version of the budget. It may be in conjunction, in agreement with that budget, it may be something different. And the finance committee presents the budget, the finance committee's recommended budget to town meeting. So that has to be, the latest that could be, I think, is 2 weeks before town meeting, right? That budget would need to be approved and distributed. I think that's the latest we could go, right?
March 25th, we have to get the warrant posted.
Well, we could always do an amendment, right? We could, I'm just trying to think.
You post the warrant on the 25th.
Right, you close on the 25th.
On town meeting floor, you could.
Right, on town meeting floor if we had to, right? So I'm just, again, just an extreme, right? The budget has to be presented to the town publicly, right, 2 weeks before town meeting, is that right?
Right.
Is that right?
The warrant, yes.
The warrant, right. So the finance committee would have that late, if needed to come up with numbers. Not suggested, because we want to be in unison together with the select board and the school all together. We want to present the budget as early as possible, so the town isn't confused seeing a budget in the warrant that's printed that becomes different on town floor. So none of those things we want to do, but I was just trying to answer your
And
question.
we don't know the Chapter 70 money
Right.
until they're saying the end of January,
Yeah, we
February
don't
1st,
know.
and that's a real number that we need to have.
So really, the month of February is by February 20th
Busy.
is really where we want to have things. And only to the extent that as we get further numbers in from the state or for insurance, we may have to tweak things, and hopefully that is small tweaks, but we want to be substantially complete. So soon, very soon.
So, I'd just like to clarify, get some clarification on exactly what the number is that we're working back from. So you mentioned, I think it was 2.1 is the shortfall.
2.1 includes the making up of the deficit from the $500,000 of free cash. So what I was saying, if you took that away, had we not gotten free cash, and it was, say, the operating budget was increased to give us 500 more, or the formula was different, and we used more of that money, and we didn't have a deficit from free cash, then the 2.1 would be less, that would be 1.6, and then we're being hit by SPED for 750, which is extraordinary. We don't usually ever see that. So we were somewhere around like 7, 8, which includes our contractual increases, steps and layings, and longevity. So when I say, albeit these things happening, and free cash being used every year does come back and haunt you, and maybe that needs to be proportionally paid back over a period of years as opposed to 1 year in a shot, could be another creative way. I was just saying, I know 2.1 looks like a big number, but I wanted to explain how that number came to fruition, because it's not as, when people see that number in the school department, they're like, how many more teachers are they hiring? What are they doing over there? It has nothing to do with that. The only one hire you will see on any of our paperwork is out of ESSER funds. We, as a school department, I will compliment Mr. Orban. We went to 2 seminars on ESSER funds, and what we got out of that, driving home twice, was we are not spending not one penny, not one dime on salaries out of this ESSER funds. Not one dime, because it creates the deficit. All the school departments, Dartmouth's having because they used ESSER funds for salaries. Westport did not. Jim had pointed out this year, there was a science teacher and it shows ESSER funds were used. I can tell you exactly what happened. We had a teacher retire, so I had a salary that I was looking for a new science teacher. And then I had a sped kid come in from another district in, like, I think it was September. And I had to hire a particular teacher to provide services to that child, or if I out of district, it would have been $125,000. So we hired a teacher at 70 to bring them in district and keep them in district. And I authorized the use of ESSER funds to I said, listen, pay that salary of the science teacher to this sped teacher coming in so we can keep this kid in district, because that was a decision on that day in September. And then we had to hire a science teacher, which came in by the end of September, and then they were like, we have no money in the budget. And I said, we gotta use the ESSER funds to fill that hole, but that's how that came
I just
about.
want to just re-ask your question in a slightly different way. The current town administrator budget for the Westport Community Schools is $21.8 million. So am I correctly hearing you say that what is the number that you would like it to be? If it isn't 21.8, what is the number that you have got penciled in on your version of the budget? I don't like the 2 million.
I think it's 23,097,568.
2309.
That's including the Diamond and the Bristol assessment.
No,
No, it does not.
that's just the
Does
community
not.
schools.
The 23?
It does not include that.
23,961 is with the regional schools.
The 20, that's
Oh, okay.
23.
The 23, that's
yeah.
the town administrator's budget. The 23 includes the regional.
The 23, okay, yeah, so it's
So-
21.8.
21.8 is what
816.
we currently
Right.
have, and it sounds like you said you just need 23,
I can have Michelle send that to you. I have the wrong list with
20,
me.
it's about 23, okay.
Okay.
I have a full-time job. I can't keep these numbers straight. We have the exact number of what that
I thought it
is.
was 21.4 with a reduction of the 500 or 400,000 in free cash.
Tom, we have
And
that
then something
spreadsheet.
got added in. So the current town administrator budget is 21.816306. That's what we are currently placeholding. So I'm just trying to understand what the ask is.
So that's an extra 1.2 million above and beyond
Yeah.
what's in this budget.
Correct. About right.
That's-
But again,
thank
I
you.
don't have that in front of
Right.
me right now.
I was trying to get that math too, so thank
I-
you. You beat me to that question.
Not an accountant.
Just on that, right, if
Yeah.
we're only allocating roughly 3.5% increase in revenue a year for the school department and the town, it's about $800,000. If we're looking at $1.6 million this year, we're doubling that, right? That $700,000 for the special ed is gonna be there next year as well, plus the $750,000, $800,000 you're gonna need for teachers increases, so you're gonna need another 1.6 next year. We're only gonna have 800 next year, and 800 the year after. So it's just not gonna work. I mean, we can plug the holes with free cash and get us through another year, but every time we use free cash, to make up that free cash and get it out of the operating budget is extremely difficult, right? Even that $500,000 we're looking at this year, I mean, to get it out in a reasonable manner, I think you're looking at about a 5-year process to get that $500,000 down. And then it's still being absorbed by the town and the schools. So every $100,000 that would reduce that free cash by, 54% is getting eaten up by the school of their new revenue, and 46 is coming out of the town side. So, yeah, I don't know how to make it work. It's the bottom line.
1.2 million is a very big number.
I can't make
Right.
it.
If I could I just ask a question?
Mhm.
Is there anything at the moment that is looked at for the free cash allocation over the next year?
So we have our capital improvement planning committee, that usually utilizes, it's anywhere 50 to 60, 70% of that money. It hasn't been allocated yet, it hasn't been presented to the board of selectmen.
The select board.
I'm sorry, the select board, yes, that hasn't been changed, it's official.
Oh, it's official now?
It is.
It only took a year and a half?
It's longer than that.
Right, the difficulty with the free cash becomes, the hole becomes greater next year.
Right.
So it may help solve this issue, but next year will be even more tremendously difficult. And again, there's no guarantee what next year's free cash may or may not be. And so then that would be disastrous.
And the free cash is gonna be high for Westport this year, but it's not high in general. You know, Dartmouth is coming in somewhere around 4 million, Swansea's like 3.5, 4 million, Seekonk is up there as well. We've just got accustomed to low free cash amounts because we've been spending it for our operating budget.
I saw on that list that you wanted to pay off the note on the campground. What's the philosophy, what's the interest that we're paying now?
So if we pay off, we're gonna pay, I think, $150,000 this year, 100,000 principal and about 40-some thousand in interest, I believe. Anyway, if we pay off 340,000 for the campground, we can put 150,000 into the operating budget, which would be 54-46 split with the school and the town.
So that was the
So
philosophy
free
of
cash,
doing
that'd be
that.
a one-time expense, right? So it's a
Right.
nice item to pay with one-time funds. We did that last year, we paid off roughly 300,000 with the campground. We can complete the whole campground
Okay,
this year.
I just wanted to understand what that was about.
Go ahead,
Well,
Jamie.
Jim did answer that
Oh,
question.
okay.
But I did have something else, not to change the subject. But Nancy, did I hear that you guys are looking to vote tomorrow to move out of the?
We have on our agenda, we have an informational and an action agenda, which is to relocate our admin and early and after daycare program, relocate out of the old high school. And if it's collectively something, I know that Jim is negotiating with UMass Dartmouth and wanted an answer from us, so we were trying to expedite that process, which is why it ended up on the agenda.
All right, well, Chris is also on that. Paul, you're on that committee, so. Cindy, rather, I'm sorry.
You look like a Paula, though,
You're
actually.
sitting where Paula usually sits.
So, and Paula sits. But, so what I'm hearing on the streets is the town wants to keep that property. This thing with UMass is just, first off, when they first approached us, it could have been an opportunity to lease some space to it. As a storage facility, it's of no use to us. This is a major asset that we own. You are potentially the best tenant that we could ever possibly have an admin in there. I mean, I do not think you could absorb what you're doing in that building anywhere in town right now.
You're right.
And the hub that you got there, just the IT hub. I mean, how are we gonna fix that? I mean, I think it would be devastating to the town if you guys decide to move out of there. I think everything that you have there needs to be expanded on. And I think we need to maybe put it to the taxpayers on, let's pull a trigger and turn that into a municipal building. And cut the annex and bring in recreation into that building and many other uses.
But these are exactly the things we need to talk about when we have $45,000 out of a free cash line item for air conditioning at the annex that we might then consolidate and go over to the high school.
There's a lot more at the annex being
Right.
spent than that.
So those are the things that we have to have, and I'm bringing it now before you. I absolutely, positively, 100% agree with you that we belong at that school. But I cannot make it work with my people with a bunch of storage boxes in the media center and in the cafeteria and I just, with little kids, at some point I said, if I have to make a decision, I gotta put this before the school committee and do what's best for the admin and, you know, that daycare program. So that's why it was on there.
Karen?
If it's something that you want us to pause for 2 weeks, and that's okay, because I didn't want, Jim was doing what he needed to do, I have no problem holding that on the agenda for another 2 weeks.
I don't think the UMass, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the UMass looking into that building had anything to do with you guys there. We weren't looking to rent the whole building to them.
No, I know, but we looked at the
That's-
space that they were looking to occupy, which would then have infringed on the use, our use of the
Then we gotta
building.
deny it. I mean, we're just looking for what we could get.
So
Get
can I
some
just,
clarification
can I
on
just
that.
say one thing before we go down this long rabbit hole? This is a very important topic, and it's a whole other committee and a whole other discussion. I don't want us to turn into a long conversation on the use of the high school at this point. I think that's a much longer conversation to have for tonight's meeting, but.
Do you want me to vote on it tomorrow night or not? Because tonight
Well,
is
we-
tonight.
I can say that dealing with UMass Dartmouth, we've worked around the current uses at the high school. So the admin offices can stay there, it's not impacting the admin offices, it's not impacting the after-school program. We made it specifically clear to them that those areas are off limits. The fields are also available for the school use. UMass is on board with that. You know, we're still in discussions. We may not get there, and the Board of Selectmen may not approve it, so it's a long way off.
So Nancy, why does it need to be on your agenda
Well,
for
it's not,
tomorrow?
it's not my idea. It was Jim needed to know, this is the use that UMass wanted to have for storage. He wanted an answer from the schools if we could, you know, if we could deal with that. We met with we had a work session just before the new year. We looked at Plan A and Plan B. I know that the space, the actual things that are lined up, don't affect me having an admin here or but having the storage that is planned, it does affect the operation of what we do with admin. And we just said, listen, we don't want the town to lose out on money from a rent, so we'll just leave and we'll separate and we'll just figure it all out. We'll just keep maintaining those fields because we need them for our spring teams. And no, it's not optimal. But we didn't want to get in the town's way, but we couldn't agree with the plan of the use of UMass for that building.
If you guys moved out of there, you'd be operating like the town's operating. And you get the annex, you get this building, and you just
We know,
you're
I
throwing
know.
good money off the bat.
But I can't live with having them with storage boxes here and there and them saying, well, it's just an awful work environment to just, and we didn't want the town to lose out on the rent. So we said, if we have to leave, we'll leave.
So, very quickly, and I agree, this is a whole other rabbit hole here, that was not aware that this would be, this forefront of or foremost in the conversation, but I just wanted to be clear, it was always my understanding that anything that UMass Dartmouth would be potentially renting would not interfere in any way with the admin and the after-school programs. So my question is, is there different information coming to you all? Is there a question of
Just the layout
what
with
are
taking the
we-
whole media center over with a bunch of storage stuff, like, so now, you know, they have professional training in there, and not every day of the week, I'm not saying that it does, but it was just the way, it was taking big, huge spaces, like the cafeteria. Now, we're not using the cafeteria, but if, I'm saying on the side, we don't use the cafeteria, and it's gonna be filled with all of these boxes of God knows what, and I've got staff walking by that cafeteria every day. It just was stuffing us into, like, it was kind of like rats in little areas, like we would just, and it just didn't work, the fluidity didn't work with storage of materials. We thought we were gonna have bodies and like learning and things like that, which we thought was great. And then now it's just a storage facility of God knows what for 3 years, and we just said, you know, we don't want the town to lose out, but we just can't operate like that.
The cafeteria's been being utilized by the Board of Health.
And
It's
now,
in the annex.
they've used and not only that, you know, the Council on Aging, we're talking about, and Gary mentioned, you know, that's a huge kitchen, that's handicap accessible for those folks. I mean, there's so much use there. I mean, we have the amphitheater there I mean, look at the villages in Florida, that's what they offer, a gym, they offer the amphitheater, they have so there's so much space there for the town use. And I'm not part of that, and I try not to get down no, we didn't find it feasible for us to be there and coexist with storage boxes. It just didn't work for us. So we said that we're better off getting out. Okay.
Hugh, go ahead.
Now, the phrase that comes to mind is beggars can't be choosers. And it's nice to have things that are not, that you'd like to have in a various way. The thing we're not talking about here is that's new money we don't have. And the one thing we need, we talk about more revenue from this and that, and now we're casually disposing of the revenue that might come from renting the storage facility that's not being used. I think that's ridiculous. Sorry.
The other side of that, Hugh, is what you have to pay if we leave is more than the money you bring in to store the stuff. So you're
Then
losing
that
money.
should be the analysis, not whether it is
That is-
unsightly to have people walking
Well,
by and so
I
on.
was told that if we leave, it was gonna cost the town, you said at this meeting, it was gonna cost the town money to run the building if we leave. So the cost analysis for that committee would have to be that.
Why would it cost the town money?
Property
If the
insurance.
town, if the school was paying for their residency there, that's town money that's just circulating through a different account.
The original thought was that it was gonna be co-occupied with UMass and the Westport
Mhm.
admin, and so we were working on that assumption. Now, that has changed, so we have to reevaluate it and see if it works. Maybe it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm not in a position to evaluate or criticize what the plans are. I'm just saying that
Occupancy.
Nancy is saying it would cost the town money. And that doesn't really make sense to me without knowing more about it, because if you're talking about losing the rental from the school committee to the town with use of the facility, okay, that's an accounting adjustment. It doesn't really change anything. It's just where the money comes from.
It's the liability
The insurance
insurance, an
costs, yeah,
unoccupied
insurance
building is liability insurance, custodian.
That's a legitimate question, I say, but that's why I'm asking the question. It's a small point. I don't mean to belabor it.
No, you're right, you're
The
right.
school has also preserved our right to that building by continually occupying it
Yeah.
for a municipal office use.
Yes.
Where we could really just move all of this stuff in and put this town hall there. We look to hire a facilitator. The building inspector, the first thing they need to do is move the building inspector, because he could move everybody in phases. And the building's large enough to expand, to turn that thing into a full municipal building that belongs to town. And then it'll be worth the kind of money that it's worth. I mean, just
I
look
think
at
that's a long way away, though.
well, you know,
right?
go look at the master plan review of the building, the other building
So
committee, what they
again, I'm
decide
trying not
to do
to
with
get
it. Okay.
into the reuse of the building, because
No,
that's a longer
I
discussion.
understand, but just to make a small point, I get that, like,
Yeah.
we've been in this deep dive
Yeah.
for, since we were actually building the new school, this conversation is going on. But this is the problem with, when we're putting air conditioning in with free cash, or we're doing IT stuff and fiber optic stuff, if we're consolidating and if that's the plan, then we don't want to do all these other things. So I understand, I was just saying that maybe the plan needs to have an idea sooner rather than later.
But we have not spent free cash on air conditioning at Annex. It's on the list as
Right.
something that may have to get replaced, because we're coming up with a 5-year capital plan, and we want to put all the items on there so it's a realistic plan.
Right, I think part of the whole point of part of this meeting and part of the discussion is a 5-year operating plan, a 5-year capital plan, to be doing things strategically and not, let's do this tomorrow, let's move in tomorrow, let's do this. We need to have a strategic plan that makes sense, and then you execute. So, the long-term building committee is trying to come up with that strategic plan, right? What would be the use? What needs to be done to make whatever happened to that building happen? So we're trying to have a plan. We're trying to develop a strategic plan and not be knee-jerk and just do things quickly. And so I guess I'll just ask the question again, why does that have to be a decision for you at tomorrow's meeting to move out of the building?
Only because
when there's so
I
much that's
was
still
told
open?
that I needed to have a decision because they were negotiating with UMass and they
But
needed to know.
who told you?
Jim told Tom.
But
So I sent the plan of the school
Please
department
help.
showing what areas
Yeah.
UMass would like to use for storage. It was originally just, the school was gonna use the admin offices and the after-school program. Then we had a meeting with UMass and some representatives from the school department stated, oh, we use the cafeteria, oh, we use the media center, oh, we use, and I said, well, we need to know what you use. So I sent the plan to the school showing the areas that I'd like to offer to UMass Dartmouth. So it's town offer to UMass Dartmouth in the areas that the school is currently using. And that's, I guess, I just found out about it today.
He did, just find it, he did. So what I can do is the vote, I can just do an option A and an option B. If it's gonna be a storage facility, then our intention is to move. If it's not, our intention is to stay.
So I have to say here, I think in the end, we all have the same goal, which is to make sure that the services this town needs to provide are funded. What I'm a little perplexed at is why when there's a potential to not only bring in some additional revenue to the town, also gives us time to, on the long-term building committee, to come up with a long-term plan that may indeed involve with consolidation of town offices. If that's doable, and we're still talking about the admin area is still a relatively small portion of the building that's being utilized right now. So I just don't understand why it can't be both. That's what I'm not.
I guess
I'm
it's
not
kind of,
getting
I guess
that.
the best way to describe it is to be in a house and to not know next week if the aunts and uncles from Canada are gonna come and stay and live with you. and then the next week you don't know if the backyard's gonna be taken up by a camper. It's that uncertainty that makes the department think that we have to have a place to go and a plan, option B, if need be, because if it's gonna be a storage facility today, and then they need a bigger piece, and then it's gonna be, oh, we're only gonna take that piece, and then we're only gonna take that piece, we have to be prepared. We can't just, to pick up and move is a huge undertaking for us to do this. And we can't with this piece and then the next piece, it's the uncertainty of where this goes. This is a 3-year lease, so then what happens next? What uncle comes in from Canada? We don't know. It's the uncertainty that we're saying, if we have to move, we'll move.
Chris, are we not, this will be my last thing
Okay.
I'll say. We were looking to hire a facilitator. And one of the reasons was, they voted at town meeting last year to throw another 200 grand and study this again. So the reason we were pushing for a facilitator is, I'm like, why do we have to waste that 200 grand that we're throwing at it? You just start, keep studying it, and then just look at what we spent on this building. Look what we're gonna spend on this building. Look what we're spending on the annex, what we're gonna spend on the annex. The annex should be condemned. The people who were against us moving into the high school said, because of code violations. Well, we don't have any code violations with admin offices in that building. None, 0. But that's what they keep throwing at us. Well, you can't move in, there's code violations. Go to the annex. Come in here when I tried to get handicapped people in here the other night on one of our meetings. And there was no lights. I couldn't get them on. I couldn't even find the elevator. And I've been in how many meetings in this building? For a year now I've been in this building. So, and then one of the people on the board told me, yeah, I fell down over there the other night. Why do we keep throwing money at it? I'm not saying get rid of this building, but look at this. We should be embarrassed, really. Have you been in that building, the old high school? The place is still in phenomenal condition. And what you guys are doing with the IT in there, it's all wired already. Why do we throw, I think we just threw another 100 grand into the IT into this building.
Just to put a final point on this, I guess my question to the school committee is, can we figure out a parameter for any potential use by UMass Dartmouth for storage or anything like that? Can we figure out what the limit is that you guys are willing to accept?
I think that could be an open discussion. That's fine. I need to have the committee in a position where this unknown and this uncertainty with this building is a very uncomfortable feeling every day. It's always, well, if we move, it's putting money into the building. Are we going to do this here? Because if we are going to move, then why am I going to put the money in here? This is ridiculous. Are we bringing our Westport basketball rec back to Westport from Tiverton, right? Back here because we have this extra gym, but are we having it for this year and we're bringing everybody back and starting a league and getting all the parents and the volunteers going and then it goes poof. So that's the frustration with the uncertainty and why we said we need to have a plan.
Did you have?
I do. I just,
Thank you.
Maybe it's more rhetorical, but so listening to what Al said before about how the state failed, right? They never kept up with the aid to the school, the aid to the town. Listening to, and I was thinking the same thought that Evan said, if you don't offer, pre-K and kindergarten, do you have the families that move into the area that have the taxes that they pay and spend money in town and go to the supermarket and do all that kind of stuff? So, and then how our state and local leaders failed us. So, and I know that there's many people in here that have a telephone line, if you will, to our local leaders, and you can maybe speak better than this than most. But do we have advocates that say this is where the school? Do we have somebody that on an ongoing, monthly, weekly, year, whatever basis that goes to the state, that goes and meets with them and says this is where we're at, this is what we need? Certainly you would think that Senator Rogers knows this since he lives in town, but so does the town have an advocate? Does the school have an actual advocate that does this? Not just when we need it, not just when, there's an emergency, but on an ongoing basis. And I know, and just to compare it in, the private sector, different industries have, if you will, their advocates, their lobbyists, their people that speak for them to the people that can make things happen. Do we have that in town? Do we have that with the school?
If I could just address that, and Tom can certainly speak better to this than I can, but it seems from my perspective that with what we have, the resources that we have, we're certainly advocating as much as we can. I mean, Lisa Kaminsky does a phenomenal job with getting external funding, and Tom's always, speaking with whether it's our representatives or the senator on,
No,
so
and like I said, I
short
know
of- short
everybody
of-
does have
right.
an area.
I mean, short of
to-
passing statewide legislation, which is why I think, I'm glad you brought that up, why I think what Tom's point is so important, getting together with other school communities to lobby for
Right.
legislation and push for that change, because that's, I think, if short of a statewide solution, I mean, at the district level with what we have, I mean, I know Tom's team is working hard on some of those things. So.
Mhm.
I would encourage all of you to sign up for the Mass Municipal Association weekly newsletter.
Mhm.
It comes out, so that is an advocacy
Okay.
group for the cities and towns in the Commonwealth. That they are kind of a lead point. We have representatives from the select board, I believe,
Okay.
that attend the Mass Municipal Association meetings. And so they're a good source of information and a good source to try to go to them to pursue avenues that, how can I get to such and such a person?
Right.
How extensively that's used, that I cannot say, but that is one group
Mm-hmm.
that will benefit the cities and towns in the Commonwealth up against the state.
Just to follow up on what I think might be a really good thing to start working on. You mentioned trying to get other school districts. The thing with the SPED funding just continues to blow my mind. Because I mean, we're talking about a number here. We're looking at about, $1.2 million, $750,000 spent on SPED. That's more than half.
2 kids.
Yeah, and that's absolutely absurd. There's
Yeah,
no
it was.
way that we're the only district that has this problem. So even if there was a way to begin some sort of, reaching out to try and have some sort of advocacy group just focused on that one particular line item alone. I mean,
Right.
that's just the transportation. That's not
We're
even the
trying to
salaries you
coordinate
have in-
transportation with other
Yeah.
districts as you speak, to do like a co-partnership. If we've got 2 kids going to Perkins, they got one, can we all take the same bus, But then there's a limitation of how long the kids can be in the bus. So we can't do it with Swansea, because the distance to there, we could only do it with Dartmouth. So we're limited on trying to do those, making those co-ops.
But I agree with that,
other
because if you
places.
see, and I can speak to, 4 years ago, the increase in SPED, the expenditures of SPED, it's just increased, it's not gonna go down.
No.
It's only gonna go up to what you said, and I think in advocating instead of, protesting and nobody listening to you, I think in advocating goes towards maybe a 5-year plan into what you wanna do. Like we have this coming, it's not gonna happen tomorrow, we know that, but it certainly is forward thinking, long-term thinking that could possibly help the cause.
So I know it's getting late, and I just want to, Zach, you made an excellent point, how we as a group don't meet that often, and this is really only our second time. And I think this was a very informative meeting that I think we should kind of put on a schedule to really meet on some regular basis, that we should figure out and not be under this tight stress of the budget, which we are right now. But I think these are healthy conversations for the select board, school committee, and finance committee to continue to discuss. But I just want to draw it back before we conclude. So I don't want to put members of the select board, I'm just curious, you're the first, you 3, you're 5, or the first budget to come our way. Do you have any thoughts, or where are you feeling through this conversation on where your next steps are going to be for the budget? Is it something, and I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, so if you don't want to answer the question, I'm not asking, but does anyone have any direction that they're moving towards based on this conversation?
Do you want to put that to our chair?
Dick, I'll leave it to you first.
Well, yeah, okay, this question is for the select board. The short answer is probably no. We did our first cut. We're going to be talking about it again. There are a lot of things that came up tonight, so I can't say there's one thing that jumps out at us. But we'll keep at it. obviously we have to figure out the situation with the schools. So, that's my quick answer.
That's fair enough. That's a fair answer. Go ahead, Tom.
Thanks, Kevin. I think one of the things that I would really almost beg the town to take a look at is finding a way to consolidate our IT services. It's not if, it's when. And I've watched districts get decimated through, malware attacks, things of that nature. And I think as we do this sort of, I don't want to say ad hoc, but the way we're doing it currently, I think there's a real interest in bringing everyone in this community together, because the financial implications of not doing it are going to be profound.
So when do we want to have our next meeting? You want to talk about timeline for that? Like, I was thinking, it's January 24th, it's a Wednesday. That should give us closer to that, where we're ready to present budgets before FinCom. I mean, I know we're not going to have the Chapter
I think one of
70.
the big thing is to get the number from the state on
Right.
Chapter 70, because that could be $200,000 or $300,000 swing right there.
Right. So maybe
that'll
we
be out
set
there this
that date when you have a better idea of when that number comes in. I mean, but just for clarity, like a Wednesday is a really good night for these representatives of the school
Okay.
committee to meet, just so people know. So if we're setting a date, Wednesday is good for the committee. I mean, if it's another day, we'll work around it, but I'm just saying for
Okay.
our
Okay,
purposes.
so is everyone comfortable with meeting one more time before we wrap up all the
I
budgets?
think the
and
24th is
to
a good
really
idea.
Connect again, right?
We could set, if we did if we just set it up preliminarily on the 24th, and if Jim doesn't have the numbers, then maybe
Yeah.
we push it.
I got a conflict on 24th because of that infrastructure.
How about the
At the high
31st?
school.
31st.
Oh, the 24th is the infrastructure. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I have a conflict on the 24th also. I'd prefer the 31st.
How's the 31st?
31st, all right with me.
Okay.
I'm getting my hair done, so that'll be a very good
All
evening
right.
for the meeting.
All right, thank you. We'll tentatively set that for the 31st, and then hopefully we'll have closer numbers, so.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion, I'll first ask the select board chair to motion to adjourn your meeting first.
Motion to adjourn, Shauna Schufelt.
Second.
I would seek from select board members, I would seek a motion to adjourn, and it has to be a roll call vote.
So move, Shauna Schufelt.
Manny Soers, second.
Okay, motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Richard Brewer, aye.
Aye, Shauna Schufelt.
Aye, Manny Soers.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion to adjourn the finance committee meeting.
So move, Cindy Brown.
Second,
Thank you. Do a roll call.
Christopher Marisha, aye.
Christopher.
Cindy Brown, aye.
Thank you.
Cindy Brown, aye.
Hugh Martin, aye.
Al,
Yes, Al Reed, aye.
thank you. Gary?
Gary's going to sleep.
We might have lost Gary. Karen Rouse, aye. Motion, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.